He said just 4 words, and my world collapsed. I gave it all to Jacob. I stood frozen in the middle of the office, the phone like stone in my hand. It wasn't that I hadn't heard him clearly. It was that my brain refused to process that sickening reality. No warning. No meeting. No email. Just one cold call, and he cut off everything I had built, over nearly 2 decades. I'm the only daughter of Thomas Bradford, one of Oregon's veteran businessmen, founder and CEO of Bradford & Co., a multi-industry investment firm valued at over $200 million. I joined the company at 21, fresh out of Stanford with dual degrees in finance and strategic management. For 17 years, I never missed a holiday, never skipped a single meeting. I was the name behind every expansion plan, every successful merger, every time the company narrowly escaped a financial crisis. And now, with a call that didn't even last a full minute, he swept me aside like I was some anonymous intern. I tightened my grip on the phone, listening to his voice, steady, almost emotionless. Sophia, I know this is hard for you to accept, but I've thought it through. Really? My voice caught. After everything I'd done, you're choosing Jacob? The same guy who just last year couldn't tell the difference between ROI and EBITDA? Silence. I heard him sigh on the other end of the line. A sound I used to think meant internal struggle, but now it felt like nothing more than fake resignation. He's my son. I let out a short, bitter laugh, not because it was funny, because the pain was too sharp to feel anything else. And what am I, a walking, talking ATM? No response, just one final sentence before he hung up. The paperwork's already signed, don't make this harder than it has to be. Bit. I stared at the phone screen as if I stared long enough, it would all turn out to be some sick joke, and he'd call back to tell me I was still CEO. Still the heir to the company I sacrificed my entire youth to protect. But no. It was really over. I collapsed into the chair, eyes locked on the glass wall that faced downtown Portland. The city was still bustling, traffic crawling under golden fall trees, but to me, it was all fading away. While I'd been breaking my back balancing portfolios, restructuring branches, and battling cutthroat CEOs in the market, Jacob, my half-brother, had been partying at villas in the Bahamas, burning through the trust fund I spent years building. Not a single real day of work. Not an ounce of responsibility, just Instagram photos with wine, women, and million-dollar yachts. I used to think he spoiled Jacob out of guilt for neglecting him after the first divorce. But I never imagined there'd come a day when he'd trade me, the one who gave up everything for the company, for a chance to make up for lost time with his real son. And the worst part wasn't being pushed out. It was being betrayed by the very man who once taught me my first lesson about loyalty in business. Suddenly, I felt a chill crawl over my entire body. Not from the weather, but from something colder. That kind of cold that runs down your spine when you realize you've just been stabbed in the back with the very knife you thought symbolized your family. I stood up and walked out of the office without saying a word. The employees who used to call me the silent captain of Bradford & Co. kept working, unaware that a coup had just taken place inside the heart of the company. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just stayed quiet and swore he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. I didn't break down. I didn't storm the headquarters demanding justice like some TV drama. Instead, I went home. I needed quiet, not to mourn, but to plan. My penthouse sat on the 28th floor, right in the heart of downtown Portland. Every tile, every piece of furniture had been hand-picked by me over the past 7 years. This was my fortress, and tonight, it would be my war room. I stepped into my home office and turned on the soft amber light. The glass wall reflected the image of a woman nearing 40, clad in a charcoal gray suit, hair tied back, eyes cold as steel. No longer Sophia CEO, but a cornered animal, plotting her counterattack. I pulled open the third drawer on the left. Inside was a black leather notebook. No logo, no label. But to me, it was more valuable than any legal document. This was where I wrote down everything the company's accounting system didn't dare record. The under-the-table deals, the shady loans, the questionable ties to international investment firms. I flipped through the pages. The names of the stakeholders. The timeline of the transfers. The loopholes in the capital contribution agreements. Every word was a bullet. And I had a full magazine. My father thought he was the only one who understood the company inside and out? Wrong. I was the one who redesigned the entire operational structure in 2021. I knew how every department functioned, every financial cycle, every cash flow gap. If I wanted to choke Bradford & Co., I didn't need a lawyer, I just needed an opportunity. And I knew exactly who could give me that opportunity. I picked up my phone and quickly scrolled to the familiar name, Edward Hale. He's in his 60s now, my father's longtime strategic partner, and the very first angel investor in Bradford & Co., when it was still just a no-name firm with a handwritten business plan. Edward always believed in me. He once told my father to his face that I was the only brain keeping this ship from sinking. I tapped call. The phone rang less than 3 times before he picked up. Sophia? Been a while since I heard your voice. Everything okay? I didn't beat around the bush. I just got pushed out of the company. Jacob's been given full control. Silence. Then a low curse. The old man's really lost it. I kept my voice calm, but each word cut like a blade. I'm not calling to complain. I need to meet. Tonight. Claremont Club. It's big. I'll be there. I hung up and exhaled slowly. There's something strange about having nothing left to lose. It's not comforting, but it brings clarity. The Claremont Club is where real power players meet. Not to talk about golf, but to decide the fate of markets. When I walked in, Edward was already at our usual corner table, whiskey in hand, eyes watching me, like he was sizing up a new deal. Sit down, tell me everything. So, I did. No filters, no sugarcoating. I laid all the wounds bare. And the claws too. How my father quietly transferred control. The meetings I was excluded from. The documents pulled from the system without notice. How Jacob, a guy who once blew nearly $500,000 on trash NFTs, was now sitting in the CEO chair. Edward couldn't hide his anger. He took a long drag from his cigarette, eyes narrowed. So, what are you planning to do now? I looked him straight in the eye. I'm going to rebuild. From scratch, a new company. Leaner, faster, sharper, and most importantly, strong enough to shake Bradford & Co. to its core. He didn't say anything for 10 seconds. Then he laughed. You really are Thomas's kid, but a hell of a lot smarter. I'm not looking for compliments, I need capital. How much? $3 million to start? And a few names only you can call. He took the last sip from his glass, then nodded. You'll have the money tomorrow. I didn't smile. I didn't say thank you. I just nodded. Like I'd just closed a deal. Because I had. This was the beginning. I left the Claremont Club a little after 10 p.m. Organs cold cut through the air like a blade. But I didn't feel it. My blood was on fire. In the car, I opened my phone and started a list. Phase 1, recruitment. I didn't need a headhunter. I knew exactly who was fed up with Jacob's leadership. I'd worked with them, trained them. I was the first to give them a real shot. People like Linda Grover, head of strategy. Carl Gwynn, risk analysis expert. Ava Jenkins, the interim CFO I personally promoted. They weren't loyal to the Bradford name. They were loyal to results, and I was results. I called Linda first. She picked up on the first ring. Sophia. I'm starting something new. I want you on board. No hesitation. Send me the address of the new office. I hung up, lips curling slightly. Not everything I lost was gone. Some things were coming back. In ways my father could never predict. 11 days after the meeting with Edward, I stood in the middle of an empty office. No signs, no logos, not even a nameplate, just white walls, fluorescent lights, and a business plan covering one glass panel. Delta Strategic Holdings. That was the name I chose. No Bradford. No ties to the family. Just 3 cold, clean words. Sharp like a blade, wrapped in velvet. My new company didn't need hundreds of employees to prove its strength. I only needed 10 of the best. 10 who could do the work of 300, and more importantly, 10 who knew who I was. Not the title I once carried under the Bradford name. The phone rang. I picked it up without checking the caller ID. Sophia, I'm ready. It was Carl Nyan, the risk analyst. The one Jacob once tore apart in a meeting just for challenging a $100 million resort project in Nevada. Welcome to the front lines, I said quietly. Send in your resignation email tomorrow morning. And Carl? Yeah? Leave nothing behind, let them panic. My list kept growing. After Carl came Linda Grover, who'd worked with me for 4 years in strategy. Then Ava Jenkins, the sharp, fearless woman my father never trusted because women aren't suited for high-level finance. A week later, Malcolm Rowe, the operations director from the Chicago branch, called. Sophia, I've had enough. Jacob wants to slash the CRM budget in half to cut operating costs. Does he think client systems run on good vibes? I smiled. Then come where your opinions aren't trampled. I'm on the first flight tomorrow. Delta had no fancy office. We rented a floor in a renovated building in the industrial north side of Portland, a former factory. Cold, noisy, but thick walls, strong Wi-Fi, and 0 prying eyes. Everyone who walked in carried the same thing. Suppressed fury, and a loyalty that had never been. For Jacob. On the first day, I looked around our makeshift meeting room. An old wooden table, 10 plastic chairs, and a whiteboard packed with our 12-week roadmap. I don't need you to thank me for pulling you out of the hellhole called Bradford & Co., I began. I just need you ready to burn the old ship down and sail a new one straight past it. No one spoke. But I saw their eyes, like soldiers who'd once lost a war, now back for revenge. Linda, strategy. Carl, risk and finance. Ava, external affairs and investor relations. Malcolm, operations. I don't need any other departments, I'll handle the rest myself. I said nothing more, no hollow speeches, everyone here knew exactly what we were doing. We weren't just building a company, we were flipping an empire. Within 2 weeks, Delta had a 3-quarter operating plan, a list of 14 potential investment targets, and a nearly closed deal with a small logistics company in Idaho, a partner I once negotiated with back at Bradford. That deal had been rejected by my father for being too small, too thin on profit. Now it was the perfect starting point, small, fast, and incredibly agile. One rainy afternoon, Carl laid a report on my desk. They're burning through their budget, he said grimly. Jacob funneled nearly $10 million into a Canada expansion project without a proper logistics plan. Add that to last year's risky crypto fund investment. They're almost out of cash. I blinked, a slight smirk forming on my lips. They're burning the whole forest just to light a campfire. If we hit their main supplier next month, they'll lose nearly 35% of their operational capacity. Do it. Carl nodded and walked out. I leaned back in my chair, staring up at the cold gray ceiling. Everything was falling into place. And the best part? I hadn't lifted a single knife. They were bleeding themselves dry. One Saturday night as I was reviewing the personnel breakdown, Ava knocked on the door. Sophia, you should see this. She placed an iPad in front of me and opened the region's top financial news site. Bradford & Co. loses 2 more senior executives amid ongoing strategic crisis. I glanced at the names. Thomas Dale, Chief Financial Officer. The same man who refused to approve the marketing budget Jacob wanted to use for a Gen Z-themed event series. Below was a brief paragraph. Sources say internal instability and lack of leadership experience are the key factors behind the recent wave of resignations. I looked at Ava, eyes calm. They're starting to bleed. Where do we strike the first blow? I stayed silent for a few seconds, then swiped to another screen. A list of Bradford's strategic contracts. I pointed to the first name. They live on blood, will cut off the oxygen. Delta wasn't complete yet. But I knew one thing for sure. When a forest catches fire, only someone who's lived in it knows whether to put it out or fan the flames. And me, I built that entire forest with my bare hands. Now, I was pouring gasoline. The news broke on a Monday morning, when the whole market was still groggy from a sluggish weekend session. I sat in Delta's small office, coffee still hot in my hand, eyes fixed on the computer screen, as the headline from the Portland Business Journal hit like a direct punch. Bradford & Co. fails to acquire Harland Logistics, reason: strategic misalignment and concerns over executive capability. I set my coffee down without rushing. I'd waited 3 months for this moment, and now, it arrived exactly as I'd planned. Harland Logistics, a mid-sized company in domestic supply chain operations, was a deal I had proposed during my final days at Bradford. I had handled the preliminary negotiations, signed the memorandum of understanding, and prepared for due diligence before being pushed out of the picture. Jacob took over the deal without ever reading a single operations report, and disaster followed. He was so overconfident, he proposed a take-it-or-leave-it acquisition term, cutting Harland's valuation by 15% in exchange for vague promises of international expansion. I knew Harland's founder, Michelle Evans, a sharp woman with zero tolerance for arrogance in business. When she called me 3 weeks ago, her voice was simple. "Sophia, I'm pulling out of talks with Bradford. I want to talk to you." We met that afternoon in a quiet bar on the outskirts of town. We didn't need to say much. One look, and she knew I understood long-term value. Not the type of CEO who throws money around to pretty up a quarterly report. We signed a strategic partnership. No press, no noise, just a quiet shift. But once the news broke, the financial world went into a frenzy. Within 48 hours, Bradford & Co.'s stock dropped 12%. Major investors like Fremont Capital and Northwood Holdings started questioning the executive board. A financial beacon analysis named Jacob directly as the lead negotiator and quoted an anonymous source. Jacob Bradford's overconfidence and lack of market understanding were the primary reasons Harland Logistics backed out of the deal. I read every line, feeling something indescribable crawl up my spine. Not joy. A colder kind of satisfaction. Like watching the man who pushed you off the cliff begin to slip off the edge himself. Linda stepped into the meeting room, a thick folder in hand. "We've got Bradford's operational problems here." Malcolm pulled enough from the old internal contacts. I flipped through the pages quickly. Outdated supply chain management system. Secondary suppliers left without contract renewals since Q2. Employee resignation rate at the Seattle branch hit 22% in the past 2 months. I looked up at Linda. They're walking a tightrope without knowing it's fraying. So what do we do now? I stood up and walked to the strategy board. With a red marker, I circled the phrase, "Indirect strike, operational imbalance." We start with the supply chain. Target their key supplier, Hawthorne Materials. They're 3/4 behind on payments, and we can use that as leverage. Carl knocked and stepped in, handing me a new report. "Sophia, I've got this. One of Bradford's investors just called me. They're worried. They want to meet the person who flipped Harland." I smiled faintly. No names needed. I already knew. Set the meeting. I'll show them what Bradford never could. Honesty and execution. 3 days later, I met Janet Monroe, investment director at Crescent Partners, a fund that owns 8% of Bradford's shares. Her office was on the 32nd floor of a black glass tower, yet inside it looked like an art studio. I understood the message. Creativity in strategy, but always watching from above. Janet got straight to the point. "I know you're the one behind the Harland deal, and I don't blame you. I just want to know, can Bradford recover?" I didn't pretend. I opened my tablet and showed her a chart of staff resignation rates, a comparison table of failed deals over the past 6 months. and short-term debt ratios that had doubled quarter over quarter. No, they won't recover. Because the man in charge doesn't understand what management means. He thinks being CEO is a title, not a responsibility. Janet stared at me. So, what do you want? I looked her straight in the eyes. I want to build a company that can replace Bradford, not copy it, surpass it. She said nothing, but I saw the shift in her eyes. No longer doubt, now, calculation. I'll be watching, and if what you say holds true, we'll consider reallocating funds. A message from Ava came in as I stepped out of the elevator. Jacob just called an emergency board meeting. Looks like the panic is real. I replied with just 3 words. Good, keep going. Because I hadn't struck directly. I was just pulling the strings. And they, the ones who thought I was a discarded pawn, were spiraling inside the maze they built themselves. And I was moving forward, preparing the next blow. That night, I was at the office, dim light from the desk lamp casting long shadows across the table, where a fresh partnership agreement with Marlowe Systems had just been signed. Ava had just left after a brief meeting. We'd won the bid for a project Bradford had chased for 4 months, and now, it was mine. My phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a name I once saw as a mountain too high to climb, now just a worn-out shadow. Thomas Bradford. I let it ring 4 times before I picked up. Sophia. His voice was lower, rough and shaky, like someone who'd just come out of a long illness. I leaned back in my chair, eyes on the glass wall ahead. Outside, Portland was soaked in cold night mist. Inside, I was about to speak to the man who had stabbed me in the back without a second thought. I thought I was off your contact list. Sophia, don't be like that. We need to talk. Still calling it talking? Sounds like you still don't get what's happening. He was silent. I heard a deep, heavy exhale. Let's meet. At the old office, tomorrow morning. I was ready to decline immediately. But then, I changed my mind. Fine, 6 a.m. I arrived 10 minutes early. The entrance to the once glimmering Bradford headquarters now felt as cold as a courtroom awaiting its verdict. The doorman recognized me and gave a small nod, his eyes reflecting something close to gratitude. 17th floor conference room. My old battlefield. Now there were only 2 people inside, my father and Jacob. Thomas Bradford no longer resembled the invincible figure in my mind. He looked thinner, his hair noticeably grayer, his gaze drained of power. Only exhaustion remained. And Jacob? Still in a crisp suit, but the arrogance that used to cling to him now hung loose, like a collapsing facade. I didn't sit. I stood, staring at them. Like looking at the 2 men who once threw me out of the fortress I had built with blood and youth. Talk, I don't have much time. My father took a deep breath, placed a folder on the table, and slid it toward me. We're losing control, investors are pulling out, client churn is up nearly 38%, the media is cutting us down daily. I didn't touch the folder. You just realizing that now? Jacob jumped in, his voice still laced with leftover arrogance. You can't let the entire company collapse over a family argument. I turned to him, my eyes cold as a blade. An argument? You call pushing me out, dismantling the foundation I spent nearly 2 decades building, an argument? Jacob was speechless. My father slowly stood up. I was wrong. I admit it. I didn't trust you the way you deserved, but now, I need you. I laughed, a laugh with not a shred of humor. That line should have come a year ago, back when I still wanted to hear it. You're still part of Bradford. You're the lifeblood of this company. I stepped closer to the table, placed both hands on the glass, and looked him straight in the eyes. I'm not part of this company anymore. I'm the piece you cut off, like excess flesh. And now you want to reattach it, after it's grown into something else? Stronger, sharper, independent? Sorry. I'm no puppet. My father lowered his head. In that moment he was no longer Thomas Bradford, the great founder, but a father who had chosen the wrong child. "If you don't come back, I'll lose everything," I replied coldly. "Then lose it. Every decision has a price, and this is when you pay." I turned and walked away without looking back. This time, I was the one who left the boardroom, and the closing door sounded like a final sentence. 2 weeks later, the financial world shook. Bradford & Co. files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. I was sitting in my Delta office when Ava placed the printed article on my desk. "They've started selling off assets." "Where are they starting?" "The Venture Capital Division, Austin branch, and the IT department." I nodded and picked up the phone. "Call Edward, start acquiring them, piece by piece." Ava smiled. "How much of the old company are we taking back?" I looked out the window. The city was blurred by rain, but in my mind, the path was crystal clear. Everything worth saving, the rest can die with the Bradford name. Never did I imagine I'd one day witness my father, the man who once called me the future backbone, sit and watch his empire crumble. But he made his choice. And I was merely the consequence he called upon himself. One morning in late March, I signed the final contract. The pen glided smoothly over the paper, leaving a clean line of deep blue ink next to my signature, Sophia Bradford. Across the table sat the legal representative from bankruptcy court, confirming that Delta Strategic Holdings had officially acquired the 4 most profitable divisions left from the ashes of Bradford & Co. Portfolio Management, Enterprise Client Services, Seattle Data Center, New York Regional Headquarters. Piece by piece, the empire I once built with my own blood and grit was back in my hands. But no longer under the old name. No longer under the shadow of a father who chose the wrong heir. Ava walked in, setting a steaming espresso on my desk. She looked at me, her voice low but filled with something close to awe. "You did it, Sophia?" I simply nodded. No celebration, no fireworks. I didn't need the world's approval. I just needed them to know. I was back, but this time as the one holding the knife. 3 days later, on a rainy Portland afternoon, my assistant knocked on my office door. "Who?" "Mr. Thomas Bradford is here. He's asking to see you." I looked up from the file in my hands. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't tremble. The emotions I once thought would surge never came. Just a moment of silence before I calmly said, "Send him in." The door opened. The man who used to be the center of my universe walked in. But now, he was only a shadow of the past. His faded gray suit couldn't hide the limp in his step. His hair had turned completely white. The fire once burning in his eyes had cooled to smoldering ash. He stood still for a few seconds, his eyes scanning the room. There was nothing extravagant. But every detail was intentional. The power here was real, not for show. "Nicer than my old office," he said. His voice, rough and low. I didn't respond. Just gave him a small nod to invite him to sit. He looked at me for a long time, then finally said, "I was wrong, Sophia." I leaned back in my chair. No words. No smile. I simply let him continue. "I was blind. I thought that because he was my son he'd carry the legacy, but I forgot. It was you who kept the company alive for nearly 2 decades. I clasped my hands together, my eyes locked on his. "You didn't forget. You just didn't want to admit it." He nodded, a bitter smile flickering across his face. "I lost everything. The company, the trust. And you." This time I looked out the window. It was raining. Water streaked down the thick glass, cold and colorless. Like the years I spent being pushed out of the picture. "No one took anything from you. You let it go." He fell silent. Deep, long silence. If I could start over. I cut him off, my voice soft. Like a paper cut. "But you can't." He stood up, gave a slight bow. "Thank you for letting me speak." I didn't respond. No need, no forgiveness, no hatred, just silence. For him to feel the full weight of what he had lost. He walked out of my office. The door closed behind him. Like the end of an era, and the start of a brand new chapter. A week later, Delta Strategic Holdings officially announced its international expansion, with 3 new representative offices in Toronto, London, and Singapore. We restructured our entire accounting system under an automated integration model and launched an exclusive investment platform for high-net-worth clients. At the first press conference since the company's founding, a reporter from Forbes asked me, "Do you think you've successfully gotten your revenge?" I smiled. A smile full of clarity and control. "This isn't revenge. I simply reclaimed what was once mine. But this time, I'm keeping it the right way." And that was the truth. I never set out to destroy Bradford & Co. I just refused to keep being dismissed in the very place I helped build. They thought I'd fall, but they forgot. I wasn't a side piece. I was the foundation. I lost. I was betrayed. But I didn't scream. I didn't strike back with anger. I struck with strategy, with time, and with my mind. And in the end, I didn't just take it all back, I built something better, stronger, and more enduring. Power isn't given, it's taken. And in the end, I took it all. Sophia's story is a powerful reminder that in life and business, no one can strip you of your true value unless you let them. Betrayed and cast aside, she didn't crumble. She used her intelligence, experience, and resilience to turn the tables. In the real world, sometimes loss is just the beginning of a powerful rebirth. Power doesn't come from names or inherited titles. It comes from your ability to rise and reclaim what you truly deserve. What about you? Would you have forgiven your father if you were in Sophia's shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful real-life stories and meaningful lessons about family and identity.